Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode in Skills Tales. My name is Leonardo Lampret and we're going to talk about the most expensive checkbox in workers' compensation. Now, have you ever accidentally clicked the wrong box on a form and immediately regretted it? Well, that mistake can cost a lot more than an awkward email to the Workers' Compensation Board. It can potentially cost you your defenses. One trend we've been noticing recently is that the Workers' Compensation Board is placing significantly more weight on initial filings, specifically when it comes to the first report of injury, or what we like to call FROI, and the subsequent reports of injury filed right after the FROI, known as SROI. Historically, these filings were often viewed as administrative documents used to communicate information to the board. Today, however, the board is increasingly treating them as a document stating what is the carrier's position on a claim. A great example is when it comes to controversies. The board is now paying very close attention to what designation is selected under the agreement to compensate. If an SROI indicates that the carrier is accepting liability, even when the carrier's intention is to continue controverting the claim, the board may conclude and found that the carrier has waived its defenses. In Employer Graph Lawn and Landscape LLC WCB number G3541731 from April 28, 2026, the carrier initially filed an SROI 04 controverting the claim. So far so good. However, several months later, what happened to be a routine filing turned into a costly mistake. The carrier filed an SROI 02 and, despite intending to maintain a controversy, selected agreement to compensate with liability. The board found that the carrier had effectively waived its defenses. Now think about that for a second. A claim that was initially controverted became accepted because of a subsequent filing that was likely intended as an administrative update. And that's not the only area where the board is relying on those filings. We're also seeing the board place greater emphasis on what body parts are identified in FROI and SROI filings. If a carrier accepts a claim and lists specific body parts, the board has increasingly relied on those filings when issuing an administrative decision establishing for those sites. In other words, if your filing says you're accepting, for example, neck, back, and left shoulder, don't be surprised if the board later concludes that there is no controverting those body parts and they will establish the case without a hearing. We're also seeing more administrative decisions issued regarding PFME findings. This decision can easily fly under the radar, especially when everyone is focused on medical development, reserves, and ongoing litigation. But if those decisions are not timely addressed, a body part may become established administratively, even where legitimate defenses existed. So, what can adjuster actually do to protect themselves? Well, here are some tips. First, treat every FROI and SROI as a legal document, not just a reporting form. Second, before submitting a SROI, ask yourself one simple question. Does this filing accurately reflect my litigation position on this claim? If not, and you want more time to investigate, discuss with your supervisor or your attorney whether or not it would be worthwhile accepting this claim without prejudice pending further investigation. Third, always double check the agreement to compensate section of the filing whenever a claim is controverted. A single incorrect designation can undermine months of litigation and the case might be established even though you had a very good grounds to litigate and controvert the file. Fourth, carefully review all accepted body parts before filing. If a body part is listed, the board may later view that as an evidence that the carrier intends to accept the body part. And finally, closely monitor administrative decisions from the board. Sometimes the biggest exposure on a file doesn't come from a hearing. It comes from a decision that nobody responded to. And the lesson here is simple. In today's workers' compensation environment, the board is reading your FROIs and SROIs carefully. The question is whether they are reading the story you intended to tell. And as we're learning, sometimes the most expensive decision on a claim is just one simple checkbox. Thank you and see you next time.